Well, good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jamie Barnes. I am the Director of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. So I'm excited that you're here tonight to talk about Utah Lake. Utah Lake is a precious natural resource to us, and we thought it would be good to have this event and start to just talk about how science, policy, and management come together on the decisions that we make on Utah Lake. So that's really the intent of tonight, is just to begin talking about those things. Representative Stratton was the one who asked us to put on this event, and he's running a little bit behind tonight, so I felt like we waited as long as we could for him to get here, and he's not here yet. So we'll move out of order on the agenda a little bit, but as soon as he gets here, we'll move and let him give some remarks. But what I really want to talk about is the amount of coordination that goes on between the legislative, executive branch, and local governments. A lot of people don't realize how often we all are coordinating on things and the natural resources that are so important, and that level of coordination that goes on. But then bringing science in to inform those decisions that we're making is so important. So with anything we do at Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, we can't do it alone. So it takes all of you in this room, it takes federal government, it takes local government, and it takes state government. If one person told me that they could run Utah Lake, I would tell them that they're crazy, because it can't be done. We have to all do it together. So I'm excited to share what we have here today and just share a dialogue of what we're doing to make Utah Lake better. So tonight, what you're going to see is that many of our mandates complement each other, that our talents complement each other, and that's what makes us strong in what we do. I think you'll see how well we all work together, and that's really what we just want to share with you, is how all of that is informing the decisions around Utah Lake. So before we get started, a couple of housekeeping things. We've set this agenda up that there should be plenty of time at the end for questions. So I think if you just hold your questions to the end, and then we'll have the experts come up to the front of the room and answer any questions that you have. And then there's refreshments in the back. The bathrooms are right outside the hall. And come and go as you please. It's informal in that way. And let us know if we can do anything for you. And we'll move out of order on the agenda, and we'll go ahead and start with Brian Steed, who's one of my favorite people and used to be my boss. So I'm excited that he's here tonight. So I'll turn the time over to him.
So sorry, you get the B team, quite literally, to kick this off, and I'll stall as best I'm able. My name is Brian Steed. Until about 3.5 months ago, I was the head of the Department of Natural Resources at the state level. For the past 3.5 months, I am in a new role at Utah State University, and it's a long title. I'm the executive director of the Janet Quinney Lawson Institute for Land, Water, and Air at Utah State University. It's a fold-out business card, and maybe we can add on something at the end of there or something. And I'm not a scientist. My background is I'm a recovering attorney. Went back to school, got a PhD in public policy a while back, had been working in really the policy sphere for the last 15 years, or 10 years really, and wanted to talk to you about kind of some of my observations and some of the things that we're trying to accomplish at the Institute, but moreover, what we can work together in accomplishing. Before I get into this, I wanted to put a subtitle onto this. So my official title is How Science Informs Policy and Management. I wanted to subtitle it Overcoming the Hey Kool-Aid Solution. So I don't know if you remember, when I was a kid, I have to admit, I watched a lot of TV. And on Saturday morning cartoons, they had the Kool-Aid Man commercials. And those Kool-Aid Man commercials went something like this. There were kids. They appeared, and they were hot, and they were thirsty, and one would say, I'm hot. And the other would say, I'm thirsty. And maybe a third might say, I'm bored. And then they would all say, hey, Kool-Aid. And through the wall would crash the Kool-Aid Man in his full red, picturesque form, and pun intended for picturesque, by the way. And he would be there, and he would say, well, I don't know, he would say, oh yeah, is what he would say, and everyone's thirst would be quenched, apparently, and we are all off to the races, and life is good. Oftentimes in public policy, I think we frequently seek the hey Kool-Aid solution, to where when we all observe, gosh, there's a problem. I wish someone would take care of it. And then you say, hey, Kool-Aid, or whatever the appropriate, hey, whatever it is, comes, and we solve the problem. I often don't think that's possible. And sometimes it takes work, it takes research, and it takes collaboration in order to get beyond that. So as I go through here, keep that in mind. So let's talk about how I ended up where I am. As I mentioned, I was a very happy state employee a mere 3.5 months ago, and I really did enjoy my job. I was a cabinet-level official working on natural resources issues, which is my passion, and it was awesome. And I was approached by my alma mater and offered a position that really was something I couldn't refuse. And I couldn't refuse it because what they're trying to do is bring together, and it says USU, and I'm not trying to be promotional. I mean, I know there's BYU people here, I know there's UVU people here, there's probably other institutions. So I'm not trying to be promotional, I'm just telling you what we do. Okay, is that fair? Anyways, we're trying to bring together land, water, and air researchers and connect them with Utah problem solvers. And this is something I'm passionate about because I've been a Utah problem solver, kind of. Right? I've been sitting in that room thinking, gosh, I'm hot, I'm thirsty. I wish that someone had the solution for this, right? And trying to figure out what it is that we can do to figure out how to solve some of these pressing problems we have as a state. So, and it was my observation, and I've worked both on the academic side and on the policy side, sometimes I've noticed that land, water, and air researchers speak to themselves. And what I mean by that is when you publish in an academic publication, is your target audience policymaking? I would argue it is likely not. And if you think that it is, I'm going to tell you here it is not. Because you will find that policymakers will not have the time nor the resources, and sometimes not even the inclination, to pick up an academic journal and read it. So oftentimes academic researchers talk to academics, right? And that's where we get a great deal of knowledge in the body of knowledge, and it's very important stuff. So we have that over here. On the other hand, we often have public servants and others who are trying to solve public policy problems, and they don't have the answers they need. Oftentimes, it's a data-poor solution, right? And I'm looking at Ben Steierman or Jamie or any of the other state folks because they haven't had the time nor the resources to go out and get the data. It turns out sometimes, and actually I would say oftentimes, that solution has already been found somewhere on that academic space. But there's been no connection, and that's actually what we try to do, is to connect those two worlds and try to translate from the academic sphere into the policy world. And I would say importantly also, to translate from the policy world into the academic world. And what I mean by that is this. You might also know, or maybe you don't know, some things that academics research may not be the top policy concerns of policymakers. And sometimes we need to incentivize those brainiacs, those very smart people, to actually sit down and think about the problems we as a society face. And that's going to take some incentives on our, and I would say from the public side, in order to make sure that they know that those problems are out there and that they are in need of a solution. So, in my last 3.5 months, we've been very, very concerned with a variety of, namely water issues, although we do focus on land and air as well. But water issues, Lake Powell and the Colorado River system has been in a free fall. We have a researcher, Jack Schmidt, who is being very, very aggressive in getting out in front of this issue and kind of preaching on how we can save the Colorado River system. You might be surprised to know, though, that his efforts are often among those colleagues that you see there on that screen and sometimes don't reach the policymaking sphere. So we're trying to connect that dot. And so 2 weeks ago, we got him in front of the Colorado River Authority of Utah Advisory Council, the Northern Advisory Council, and had him present on some of his findings that was really informational to everyone involved. So that's the sort of things we're trying to do. Similarly, on the Great Salt Lake, we have been really very concerned about the levels of the Great Salt Lake and how are we going to address those problems, because there are major problems there. So interestingly, we have at Utah State over 100 years of research on a variety of issues very similar to this. That is not the Great Salt Lake, that's Lake Ermia. where we've had researchers since the 1950s looking at the problems of a declining lake in Iran called Lake Urmia, which is very similar in size and makeup as the Great Salt Lake. We don't want to be a Lake Urmia because they are almost completely dry now. And having all sorts of environmental problems as a result of that. And so trying to resolve that. So we have teams of researchers looking at all things Great Salt Lake related. In fact, one of the things we most recently did was we formulated a strike team. No, not to attack the lake, but to attack the problems facing the lake in conjunction with the University of Utah. Put together a strike team of collaborators. A lot of the folks at the U were interested in air quality issues. A lot of the folks at Utah State were by far and more interested in water issues. But lining those two things together, it actually made a very nice team. So we had climate experts, we had water experts, we had engineers, we had ecologists and limnologists. We had a whole bunch of folks in the room to try to talk. Now, we're not there yet in terms of finding solutions, but we are there in finding kind of shared understandings of where we are in the lake system. Perhaps most importantly of all, we partnered with those state agencies in the Department of Natural Resources and eventually with the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food, because that'll be part of the solution, as well as Department of Environmental Quality, to bring all of us together for a shared understanding on what we're seeing and what the potential approaches might be. On the Great Salt Lake, I can tell you that we've come up with just generally 6 observations. One, hey, it's a historical low. It's very complex. And I would tell you these same findings would be very applicable to Utah Lake. There's a variety of contributing factors, but interestingly, precipitation and depletions remain roughly constant over time. Stream flows have been in decline over time, and temperatures have risen. That's all happened in the contemporary period. We would expect lower levels given those factors. Human use needs to be the focus, and then interventions will work. And just to show you kind of the things that we've been looking at as that strike team has progressed, we made a presentation last Thursday at Speaker Wilson's Great Salt Lake Summit, talking about kind of where we are. You can see where the lake is currently, the historic low, and that's the contemporary record high. You can see the temperatures over time are increasing. You can see Bear River annual stream flows on the decline, which is the largest inflow into the Great Salt Lake. You can see Weber River also in decline. Interestingly, you see Jordan River remarkably stable for a lot of reasons, and that's because we're importing a lot of water from the Colorado River system into Utah Lake, and then eventually through the Jordan River into the Great Salt Lake. And then you see that there's a variety of things that we can attribute the decline to, and then we have a big unknown on natural and human consumptive use, which is a big pot of, if it's hotter and drier, the natural system is going to absorb some of that water, but also human water use is going to impact how much water gets in the lake. And then you can look at depletions over time, right? And this is depletions, so it's the water that we're losing out of the system due to human use. That's the contemporary period. That's agricultural use. That's evaporation off of reservoirs. That's municipal and industrial use. That's wetlands. So you manage the wetlands to have like duck clubs, as well as the Bear River Bird Refuge, which are both extraordinarily important to the ecological functioning of the lake. But there is some depletions associated with that, and there's mineral extraction. So you can go through the whole thing and say, well, wow, that's awesome. There's good data there. Well, how does that all apply to Utah Lake? I can tell you that I think that it applies very well to Utah Lake. That if I'm going to look at the existing circumstances that are on the Great Salt Lake, there is already a fair amount of research that's been done. I know this because we have some of that research at Utah State ourselves. We have Janice Brainey, who's done an extensive amount of research on the historical, they take core out of the lake bed, and you're able to see historically what the lake was like over the last 200 years. It's really fascinating work. She's had other associates, Aaron Rivers, that looks at the associated wetlands around there, as well as, and this is one of my favorite stories, is Christina Cervasa, who was from Romania, came to the United States, never having spent any time outdoors, and just fell in love with being outside. And she became kind of this superstar, where she was a Goldwater fellow. Those are the top undergraduate researchers in the nation. She became a Goldwater, but all of her work was on what are the impacts of fisheries here on Utah Lake. Why does all that matter? Turns out we have a pretty large database. And I'm not going to take credit at Utah State. I know Utah State because I work there, or at least I have for 3.5 months. So I know pretty much everything. But if we were to take this and look at where we are as a state on research on Utah Lake, I promise you we could put together one heck of a database of things that we know, right? We could then start discussing the things that we don't know and actually target the things that we don't know so that we're able to then maximize the research that we put into the lake. So what I would propose as part of this is maybe we do something similar with Utah Lake that we're doing with Great Salt Lake, that we formulate a strike team. Again, not to attack the lake, but to find what we know, what we don't know, and to coalesce around some of these open questions. Because, not to paraphrase another TV show, but the answers are out there. Sorry for X-Files fans. And we don't have to be hoping for the solution to have the Kool-Aid man or whomever appear to give us the solutions. We can actually start working on this ourselves, and we don't have to hope for that day, but rather we can actually put together a strategy. And my suggestion would be, and I can tell you, I've talked to the president of Utah State, we're willing, but we need partners. And so my plea to you, and I see that Joel now is here, so he can, oh, and Representative Brammer, great. Yeah, hey. Oh, good. But I think that there's an opportunity here to do something special in the lake. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. But it would be helpful if we talked more, and it would be helpful if we collaborated more. And in so doing, I think that we can get a long ways ahead of where we are currently. And with that, I'll wait till the end for questions, but that's kind of my pitch, and hope that's helpful. Thank you so much.
I gotta fix this mic for our tech people. It's driving them crazy. All right, Director Ferry is here, so I'm going to let him give a few remarks, and then we will move on, and Teresa Wilhelmsen, Director of Water Rights, will go after Director Ferry, except for Representative Stratton just walked in. So Director Ferry, then Representative Stratton. So.
Thank you. And Jamie, thank you for having me here, and I want to give a special shout out to Representative Stratton for really spearheading tonight and bringing this together. I know this is a collaborative effort, and I really want to thank former Director Steed for I'm here today because of him. Literally, if he wouldn't have stepped down, I wouldn't be here. So, thank you. But I want to echo some of his comments on that collaborative effort. Really, this is the issues that we're facing on Utah Lake are issues that no one single agency or entity or individual can do by themselves. We look at the broad scope and depth of the issues that exist there, from water quantity to water quality, to understanding the ecosystem of the lake, to understanding the impact that we as humans and the growth are having on the lake. As we develop this valley, what additional impacts are we going to have? And how can we help to mitigate those? We truly have a gem in our backyards. And what a unique opportunity we have today. The attention's here, the focus is here, and I think that there's a willingness. People recognize how incredible the lake really is. And so when we look at what's there and what we can do, what options are available, I think that we consider all of those options. And we work as a collaborative team to come up with the right solution. This isn't me versus you, us versus them, anything like that. We can't go into our corners and kind of draw our red lines in the sand. We have to say, what can we do? Let's have an open mind, all options on the table. And that's, I think, the approach that at the Department of Natural Resources we want to take. We do want to come up with solutions. I think that as we look at, there's a really big study that's being done right now by the Department of Environmental Quality, a multi-year, multi-million-dollar study that will be out in the next 18 months or so. And we're going to have some significant opportunity to look at some of the solutions and some of the opportunities that exist there. So I just want to thank you for being engaged, for being here tonight, for having recognizing that this is an issue and it's something that we need to address together. So the work that's being done, I think, is absolutely incredible. We're going to come up with good solutions, and we will ultimately come up with good outcomes for this real treasure that we have in our backyard. So thank you, and just know that we're here to help. So thank you.
It's good to be here with friends, and I see so many faces, and I appreciate the chance to just share a couple of thoughts. It's a remarkable thing to consider the resources that we have and the power of individuals getting together to be wise stewards. We, as a legislative body, we have consistently strived to, in my tenure and my time there, seek to be fulfill, first of all, our constitutional responsibility of setting policy, caring for the funds, and then the oversight. But in that process, seek to be the very best stewards we can of the resources we've been given. And in that light, there's been some great progress. But I want to thank, first of all, the efforts of all. Anyone that's weighed in on this issue, I commend and I thank, and I'm grateful for what has been done to this point. I remember as many years ago, probably in the mid-90s, we've had discussions about Utah Lake and how we can address the concerns there. And I ran across, and I've shared this before, but I ran across an article of my grandfather, who back in the late 50s and 60s was involved in, just like you, anxiously engaged in the community, a community member. The size of Orem at that time was a lot closer to 3,000 than the 100,000 it is, and there's a lot of difference in our communities. But the number one goal that year of the Chamber of Commerce was to fix Utah Lake. And I think that's a remarkable thing that, we inherit generations as we look at what we've done with the lake to try and make it a good and helpful resource for our community. Well, we are in 2022. We're struggling with drought and issues that are challenging and in many ways unprecedented. And yet we're here together. And I think probably the greatest strength, by the way, I bring you the greetings of our speaker. I was just in a meeting that's less than about 50 minutes ago with him, and he sends his regards and appreciate the work and effort that and wanted me to share the commitment the legislature has to this process. And getting together like this, and it enlightens and helps the understanding. We recognize the power of the brain trust that we have. We draw upon that as the director, Ferry. I have a hard time, I like to call him my good colleague, but as Director Ferry said, working together in a collaborative way is going to help us get to where we need to get. And it becomes a legislative duty to help make sure that the funding is properly in place and the oversight is there. And the policy is where it needs to be. We all agree that we need to engage in to the term I heard earlier today. We were talking about this issue in our appropriations committee meeting. We need persistent patience to get where we need to be on this, and it's going to take all of us putting forth our very best effort. But my goal is to have and do all we can to help this great resource be what it can be, its very best version, as we continue to grow it and what we do. So I want to thank everyone for their participation, their engagement, to be involved, being intentional with it. Again, I encourage, as I always have, that we're civil and recognize the strengths of even those arguments that are on the other side of where we may be. as we listen together, I trust that we'll be able to come up with the very best solution. So thank you for being here. I'm committed to stay with you, see this through, and have the fruits that we're hoping for. So let's proceed. Thank you.
If you want, Teresa.
Okay, that's perfect. So he'll pull up my slides here. Maybe I'll just start talking. So my name's Teresa Wilhelmsen. I don't recognize a whole lot of faces, just a handful of them, actually. I did spend about 10 years working in our Utah Lake, Jordan River regional office as a regional engineer. But I am the Utah State Engineer and the Director of the Division of Water Rights. And so what I am going to walk you through is how we manage the water for this lake and its tributaries, and a little bit of the complexity that you're going to see that we do. So let me just first talk about, so the first water rights were established in the Morse Decree back in 1901. And Utah Lake was really a storage reservoir for rights within Salt Lake Valley. And there are 5 primary rights, canals that come out of the Jordan River just below Utah Lake. And they are diverted at the Turner Dam and at the Joint Dam is the main diversions below Utah Lake. So we manage these rights within Utah Lake to ensure that the primary rights that are in Salt Lake Valley are met. There is also another responsibility of the state engineer, and that's flooding and flood control. There has been, and many of you that are familiar with the lake know there's a compromised level to the lake. There's a little bit of history here that the Turner Dam, it did result in some flooding in Utah County in that operation. But as state engineer, we also have to, I have to manage that compromised level, but also flooding down the Jordan River, mainly at what's called the surplus canal. And we have to make sure that we aren't flooding with releases from Utah Lake, the lower parts of the Jordan River. So there's a balance there that we have to really manage. Kind of moving on, one of the big management tools that the state engineer has with the Utah Lake, is what's called the Utah Lake Distribution Management Plan. This was established through a public process, public meetings, public input, and it came about in 1992. And it really established the protocols for Utah Lake and how the junior upstream rights interact with the senior rights that are in Utah Lake. And I'm going to get into some of those details of how we manage those. The last little piece on this slide that I want to mention is how we manage groundwater with the surface water of these systems. So we did partner with the USGS, the United States Geological Survey. We do have a groundwater model for this basin, and it's a pretty good one. We use it to help us manage what impacts there can be. I don't think I did that. Brian, did you do that? Anyway, so we use that model to help understand what groundwater impacts are. We did in 2014 adopt a state engineer's policy for water rights that we do allow shares of stock in these 5 primary canals to file change applications and move them into groundwater for groundwater wells. And a lot of the cities in this valley did that exact thing for their water. In northern part of the valley, we actually do not allow surface to go to groundwater anymore because of the impacts and the safe yield of the aquifer. So we're managing that groundwater and surface water. Let me talk a bit about the Provo River and some of the complexities here. So the Provo River was decreed in 1921, and there's 2 divisions to this Provo River. You have the Wasatch Division and the Provo Division. The decree is basically structured so that up in the Wasatch Division, they can divert large amounts of water. And the whole intent was to do some underground storage. So they would put the water out on the land, it would seep into the ground and return to the river later in the season to satisfy the primary rights in the Provo Division. So it would come back to the river and satisfy those rights. A little bit later on this slide, I'm going to tell you how that is managed by man now. It's not a natural occurrence anymore. So the Provo Decree, or the Provo Project, was developed in 1935, and that's when you saw Deer Creek in 1938, the Weber-Provo Canal. That is a trans-basin diversion that brings water from the Weber River system over to the Provo, and it's used in the Provo River. You also have the Duchesne Tunnel that was established in 1948. That brings water from the Colorado River system over to this basin, and that is called import water, and the importer of that water can use it to extinction when they bring it into a basin. There is established law that allows for that. This project is operated by Provo River Water Users Association. So then you see the Central Utah Project come about, the Bonneville unit, and that's where Jordanelle comes into play. The Wasatch County Water Efficiency Project that's listed there, that is the project that now mimics. They store the water in Jordanelle, and instead of the Wasatch Division spreading that water across the ground and it coming back to the river later, they actually do controlled releases from Jordanelle to mimic that timing and those releases. So that's called the WIC-WET project. And this is operated by Central Utah Water Conservancy District. So some of the other fun elements of this, you'll notice that's in purple. Those are actually they're paper exchange applications. So that management plan that I talked about allows for upstream storage to occur in Deer Creek and Jordanelle. And if the senior rights in Utah Lake are satisfied, then that storage can convert so that it becomes primary storage upstream for those users that have later rights. So really us managing the levels of Utah Lake, what water is coming into there allows then storage to convert. And I'm just going to point out, there's also another import water, it's the Ontario Drain Tunnel, and that comes over from Park City into this area. There's actually, it's kind of a unique, you have to get a Warren Act approval to store a non-federal right in a federal storage facility, and the Ontario does have that to store in Deer Creek. But I'm going to point out kind of an interesting piece here. The Olmsted Power Plant, do you see that? That's probably, I would say, the most expensive water right in the state of Utah. $42 million for that water right. What that key piece did was that Olmsted plant has the senior right on it. So when they did the Jordanelle and Deer Creek, they do an exchange, and they rebuilt that plant for $42 million to keep that priority date on the system so that they can store upstream and convert. So they still use that plant, and I'm just going to put a plug in for that plant. If you haven't been there and done a historic tour, it's fabulous. The history of that plant is amazing. There's actually a really good book about it, but one of my favorites. Okay, let me talk about the Spanish Fork here. We also manage the flows from the Spanish Fork River and Hobble Creek systems. So you see that the High Council decree in 1879, so you see some of the older rights on the Spanish Fork here. They have the five main canals that divert. You see that's below the mouth of the canyon. The decree did not recognize the rights above that, so those have come in later. The McCarty decree, that recognized a basically classes on that system that we distribute those rights for, first, second, and third class. And then you see the Strawberry Valley Project come into play in 1905. This is another large-scale trans-basin diversion from the Colorado River that brings water through stored in Strawberry Reservoir, comes through the Strawberry Tunnel into Diamond Fork and into the Spanish Fork River. And then it eventually also makes its way to Salt Lake Valley with this system. And so there is a pipeline that takes it from the Spanish Fork over to the Provo. Let me talk a little bit about how we do the accounting on the systems. So with Utah Lake distribution accounting, we actually have 5 separate distribution systems in this area: the Lower Jordan, Provo, Hobble Creek, Spanish Fork, and Utah Lake. We have a commissioner on each of those and deputy commissioners. Those are employees of the state engineer that are out on the systems, turning the water into the ditches and tracking the amount of water that gets diverted under what water rates. We've developed what's called a water commissioner accounting tool. We call it WCAP. And this is a distribution accounting tool that if we have telemetry, automated data that we can collect on diversion sites, it can pull it right into this distribution accounting tool. Now, this distribution accounting tool isn't a forecasting tool. It's a tool that we look back a day and say, okay, who got what water where? And then we're able to manage for the next day and then the next day. And we look back, so we have records that go back to 125 years that show what rights have been diverted. But this is a more modern tool that we use. We develop it. I know that there was a bill last year that was passed that allows us to do more of these distribution accounting tools and gives us some funding to do telemetry and measuring to make these more accurate. Most of you, when you see Great Salt Lake, that too, when you see Utah Lake, you probably just see one level. When we look at it, we actually see a teacup that has colored layers in it. That helps us manage the water accounts that are within Utah Lake and who has what water rights within the lake. And this is just a sample of that teacup that comes out of our water accounting tool. And we just manage who gets what deliveries, who doesn't, and who does each year. And maybe I'll just mention in talking about this accounting tool, where we ended with Utah Lake this year, and I know Brian mentioned, the effects that climate is having, temperature is having. There in this distribution plan, we have primary rights, those 5 canals, and then we have secondary rights. We actually, for the second time, had to cut secondary rights in Utah Lake. Now, the lake looked full because there's import water that has come in from the Colorado River system and the Weber system. So that is a different color that is not part of that secondary and primary rights. So secondary rights did get cut off this year. We had to cut those off, which were, just as an example, some Kennecott rights, Saratoga Springs rights for their secondary systems. The primary rights, they didn't take a cut, but they did have to reduce because their volumes were also very close to being extinguished this year. So very different, and I can only remember 2 times that we've cut secondary rights on Utah Lake. So things are changing, but I think the institutional and the historical systems that have been built have really helped make this system work the way that it does. I think I skipped one little bullet. Can I go back? So I need to talk just a couple quick little bullets here. Let's see how much time I have. I do have time. Let me talk about that import water. Those are the amounts of import water that come into the system. It's about over 100,000 acre feet that come in from the Duchesne, the Provo River Project, the Siler Tunnel, and Strawberry Tunnel. And the Strawberry return flows, I want to just mention that just a little bit. In 2006, the Supreme Court did basically direct the state engineer to determine if a calculation method is done to determine what is the import water that is sitting in Utah Lake that can be exchanged up into Deer Creek and Jordanelle. So when I showed those purple lines that were not actual water courses, this is a foundation that helps determine what water that's been stored out of priority upstream can be converted out of Utah Lake. And this is a key court decision that gave us that guidance. So I think I'm about out of my 15 minutes. There's 2 other people that are going to come up here, but I just wanted to say thank you. And there's my exit music, I think. So thank you. Any questions that you have on the operation of Utah Lake, please feel free to reach out. Hopefully I know it was a lot of information, really condensed, but hopefully you can kind of see the complexity of the decisions that we make every day in the state engineer's office with the movement of water. So thank you.
Okay, Candace Hassenegger from Water Resources is up next, and we're going to open these blinds so you guys can see the lake from outside. Yeah. Let's see.
Green is good, red is back.
Good evening. How are you guys? Good. Got a couple thumbs up. I'm just really glad that they opened up the blinds so you can see that beautiful view for the reason why we're all here tonight. My name, as Jamie mentioned, my name is Candace Hassenegger. I'm the director at the Utah Division of Water Resources. And as I've been at Water Resources for the last 15 years, I have never seen so much attention to water issues across the state. And Utah Lake is no different. So obvious to everybody, we have been in a long-term drought. Particularly, this is a comparison from last year to this year, and we're in a little bit better situation than we were last year. But what I always like to indicate to people is because last year was so hard. I don't know if you guys remember back in July when we've had, straight days of hot with no rain in sight, and I was driving in my hometown, and I looked over and I saw this billboard that said, "Lord, whatever you're baking, it's done." And I quickly pulled over and snapped a picture of it because that's how I felt. And then we got some monsoons, which were super great and kind of started off our year to be better than it was last year. That being said, we're still in this long-term drought. And our reservoirs you can see the effects in our reservoirs, right? Our reservoirs are filled by our snow, the snow that accumulates in our wintertime, and it warms up, and the precipitation the snow runs off and fills up our rivers and our lakes and our reservoirs. And we can see here the statewide average as of today is 42%, which is pretty remarkable because it's about the same place as we were last year at this time. But we started, about 10% lower the year. So, and that goes to a lot of the conservation efforts that I'm going to talk about from all the residents and all the businesses who are working to really save this precious resource that we have. One thing to note when you're looking at reservoirs is it really depends on where you're at, what the reservoir was designed for, how long it's supposed to hold water. Some reservoirs only hold enough water for 1 or 2 years, while others are held, 5 to 7 to 10 years. So it's just important to note when you're looking at the different reservoir levels. The one area of the state that is still very extremely hard hit is the Sevier River, which is outside this basin, but it's just important to note the impacts across the state. And we look ahead, we like to look at these charts that this is the 3-month outlook. So December, January, February, it's telling us we have likely leaning above or likely above normal temperature conditions, and we have equal chances in northern Utah for precipitation, whether it's above or below. There was once a snow survey general manager by the name of Randy Julander, and he used to always like to say equally clueless, but equal chances. We can go either way. I'm hoping for something bigger. Brian did a great job talking about Great Salt Lake, and so I'm not going to go into a ton of details other than to say a couple of things. When I look at Great Salt Lake, I view it as kind of like the canary in the coal mine. It tells us kind of generally our long-term trends, how it's impacting our water supply conditions and what the levels at Great Salt Lake are. The other thing I'll say, I was at another conference, a water summit up in Layton earlier this morning, talking about Great Salt Lake, and someone came up to me afterward and said, well, don't forget Bear Lake. And don't forget Utah Lake, right? And I think it's really important to note that we are not trying to pit reservoirs or areas or lakes or reservoirs against each other, right? We are all in a connected system, in a connected basin, and we have to act like that and realize that all of the work that we do will impact all of our lakes and rivers. So this year, we've had a pretty remarkable response to the drought that we have been in. I kind of like to talk, when I talk about our drought response versus water conservation, and just to highlight the difference is a drought response is like a temporary condition. Like, we are going to do this until we have a better water supply tomorrow. Where long-term water conservation efforts is just that. It's a sustained effort where we are reducing how much water we're using over the long term. And so we can see the drought response has been pretty phenomenal. And these are just reported numbers, so this is not saying this is the whole statewide numbers or anything, but Salt Lake City reported that they saved 2.9 billion. Sandy City saved 726 million gallons. Washington County and our southern Utah friends saved 111 million gallons, providing less water. Weber Basin saved about 22%, which is about 5 billion gallons. And in Jordan Valley, they saved another 500 million. And we total all these up, it's about 9 billion gallons, which equates to about 28,000 acre feet. So there was significant water savings that weren't having to be delivered. And it's a big shout out to all the residents and businesses that made it happen. We've also seen a ton of interest in our rebate programs. We have smart irrigation controllers, and over the life of the times that we've been doing the rebates, we've had over 23,000 smart irrigation controller rebates. So if you haven't gotten one yet, they're out there. Pretty much pays for your smart controller and takes the guesswork of how we irrigate our lawns and gardens. We have toilet rebates, and so we've done about 3,000 of those. Another element that we're seeing a lot in the kind of water conservation realm is the adoption of water efficiency standards. So this is really trying to get to the heart of how we're growing today and into the future. And I have said before, so I'll say it here again, it's kind of, when you're a doctor, the first thing you do is kind of stop the bleeding. So first we need to change how we're developing, and then go back and look at retrofitting some of our current area. Because I think, to Brian's point and the messages that we are sharing, is we need a long-term water conservation ethic and a change in how we use water, and we need to use less. So we are seeing that throughout some municipalities throughout the state. When we talk about long-term water conservation, there's really three pieces to the puzzle. There's regulation, whether that's at the state or local level, which can include water conservation plans, regional water conservation goals, required metering, tiered water rates, landscape ordinance, plumbing standards are all different types of regulations that are either currently required at the state or the local level. There is also the ability to incentivize it, right? So that's how do we get people to change behaviors? And we do that through our rebate programs. We also are working with water suppliers to provide rebates for transparent water billing. So those are those similar bills like you get for your energy, where you're like, if you are doing really good and you use less energy than your neighbor, you get the smiley face or whatever. It's kind of the similar idea. And then also providing secondary metering grants, which I'll get into a little bit more. And that goes to the secondary water suppliers. So there are different levels, whether they're at the individual residents or water suppliers or secondary water suppliers. Then education is a huge component of it. These days, most people are fairly disconnected from their water source. They go to the tap, we turn it on, and it comes out every day. And that's a huge thank you to all the water suppliers and the district managers out there that make that happen for us. But it also it makes it a little too accessible, right? We don't ever have to live without it, most of us, we're pretty disconnected from it. And so that education piece of the complexity of water, the importance of it is an extremely important part of it. And we want to start with our youngest kids, right? We have had a 4th grade program where we went around and visited schools, had poster contests to really kind of instill that water-wise ethic at the beginning. So when we look, last year we worked with the governor's office to really identify like the 4 best ways to fast track water conservation in the state. And we did this by looking at 1, integrating land use and water planning. So that's what I kind of already talked about, is growing right from the start and trying to reduce how much water we're using. Once we put in that development or that landscape, that's going to set our water use patterns for decades to come. And that really can impact us in the long term. So let's integrate how we're growing and do it right from the first. We can't really talk about generally water conservation in the state without talking about agriculture. We know agriculture uses a significant amount of water, and the goal with agriculture and agricultural optimization programs is that we are trying to allow agriculture to sustain. They're a part of our heritage, and we want them to be successful. We just want to see, is there a better way to do it? Can we use less water? Can we change crops? Can we innovate, provide new technologies? And so there are a bunch of grants available through the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food. There's about $70 million put toward that program. So it gives farmers an opportunity to go and improve how they're irrigating their crops. Another $250 million, which is a ton of money, went to secondary metering. So this is an effort that we know through the studies that have been done that if we just go and put on a secondary meter and tell people what they used without even charging more or changing the rate structure, they are going to reduce their water use between 20 and 30% based on the studies. So it's one of the kind of lowest hanging fruits. I have been very involved in this because this $250 million came to the Board of Water Resources, and I have a slide on a little bit more details on it. But yeah, so it's an exciting one there. And then we really wanted to expand the way we are landscaping and provide incentives for water-wise landscaping. So looking at trying to do a statewide, we call it a turf buyback program. What I really want to say is we want to put in water-wise landscaping. And so $5 million went to the Division of Water Resources to develop that program. I can give you a little bit more details. So on the secondary metering portion, so far we've authorized $190 million. And I just got to give a huge shout out to my team because that was a lot of work over a short amount of time to try to get that money authorized. This is money that has an an expiration date as part of the American Rescue Plan Act. So we have to have the projects completed by 2026. So we're trying to get it in the hands of the secondary water suppliers so they can get those meters in the ground. And it looks like about 12% of the meter applications came from the Utah County area. So with an estimated installation meters of 46,000 meters to be installed over the next few years here. We will have another round of applications. So I can happy to provide more details if anyone is interested in that. When we estimated if we get all of these meters in place with this $250 million, it saves about 54,000 acre feet, which is the size of about East Canyon, Sand Hollow. So it's a significant water savings. We do estimate that we'll need additional money, but we're really focused on getting the money out the door right now. I just wanted to highlight a little bit more about the landscaping rebate. So this came out of HB 121. We have $5 million to get these landscaping rebates out into residents' hands. We're currently working with districts that have them, and then also working to expand it to the other parts of the state. We're expecting a soft launch to begin the end of the month, and then the residents will have about a year to complete the project. And so if you're not going to start in the end of October, then you might want to wait till next year. But we're excited about this, to have this program go out, and we'll have a full launch with the completely updated website in the spring. So you can sign up for email rebates or email updates if you guys are interested, but it's pretty exciting. And generally just know that we need to really change how we use water in the state and reduce how much water we're using. So that is just my brief presentation for you to talk about some of the efforts as far as water conservation going on in the state. Happy to answer any question, or I can just turn it over to my friend John Mackey from Water Quality. Okay.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. I'm really excited to be here tonight and to hear all the exciting talks that we've had as well. I'd like to thank Representative Stratton for continuing to encourage us to get together through these summits, as well as thank Forestry, Fire, and State Lands for organizing us all together. It's a great venue, and I'm really happy to see everybody out. So I'm going to talk to you about the Utah Lake Water Quality Study and how the science that is being done in the study is intended to inform policy. This study is really the largest water quality study that we have done in the state of Utah ever. It's a comprehensive study. It's funded by many different parts and players, and has a lot of involvement through state, local, public agencies and organizations. So it's really a very important study looking at how we're going to take care of and protect this wonderful resource. So I'm going to, oh, that's not going to work. So what I'm going to talk to you about throughout my 15 minutes here is these important takeaways from this study. Good science will inform good policy. To have good policy, policymakers need good information. They want to be and need to be well informed. They need good data. And to get them that, we need to do good science. So, just as an aside, why do we do good science? Why do we do science at all? It's really, one of the reasons anyway, is to address certainty or uncertainty. We don't know something and we need to figure it out. Often the information or the answers are not just right at your fingertips, and there's a couple ways of dealing with uncertainty. So I'm an engineer, and so I have scientific background and training, but I build projects. We build projects usually on tight schedules and on tight budgets. So what do we often do when we are uncertain? Well, engineers have been accused of measuring things with a micrometer, a very accurate measurement device, marking them with a piece of chalk, and cutting them with an axe. When we don't know, we build in conservativeness. We tend to over-design to account for these uncertainties that we have. Sort of a brute force approach. Things end up costing more when you do it that way. They may last long, but often, as a result of this overbuilding and overspending to cover up for our lack of information, our lack of knowledge, we end up with, well, in my case, in the case of a water planter, very large infrastructure that has to last a really long time because of how much it costs. And eventually, unfortunately, all too soon, it becomes antiquated, especially now where technology is so much more advanced. We want to be able to adapt to technology, adapt to newer, better knowledge. Science isn't really an end in and of itself. Science addresses questions often, as you all know, additional questions, newer questions arise. We want to be able to address and take advantage of new information in a nimble way and not be stuck waiting to pay off large debts, for example, for antiquated infrastructure. So we want our strategies that we are using to address our problems, like our problems with Utah Lake, to be adaptive. We want them to be flexible enough so that we're not having all our eggs in one basket, right? We want to have multiple options and ideas to implement so that at the smaller local scale, we can be addressing problems as well as at the regional scale. We need integrated and efficient long-term management strategies. So we may come up with the best ideas in the world for solving some of our problems, but they have to last. Really, they have to last forever. And this is management. Again, we need them to be nimble and flexible so they can adjust. And we want them to be compatible with all the other things that we're attempting to do, trying to do to improve the lakes. And we must all pull together as Team Utah. We've heard it before as well with some of the earlier speakers. There are lots of opinions and different viewpoints and different needs and ideas about what this resource should be, can be. And we will always have these differences of opinion, but it's really important that in the end, we're all one Utah, we're all one Team Utah, who's going to take care of our problems and our resources by working together. Okay, the challenge we face with the science panel. There are a number of effects and causes that we look at that we think of as being important to addressing, for example, harmful algal blooms on Utah Lake. The blooms don't just occur, they occur as a result of nutrients, water levels, warmer temperatures. The clarity of the water affects the blooms. Wind. invasive species, carp being a good example, loss of native species, and of course, the growth that is upon us and that will continue for years. So, So we have all these problems, but really we don't have a lot of levers to pull. There's not a lot of these things that we really have control over: wind, temperature, lake levels to some extent. And many of them are difficult. So I'm the director of the Division of Water Quality. We are regulators. One of the tools that's available to us, one of the levers, if you will, is regulation. The other important tools that we have available to us are incentivizing. For example, the legislature provided $30 million in ARPA funds to go into water quality projects to work to improve Utah Lake. And partnering, and this is really a lot of what we're doing today, is we're partnering with leadership, communities, and citizens to be able to reach consensus at what we want this lake to look like and how we're going to get there. Could somebody bring me a cup of water? Thank you. So, the Utah Lake Water Quality Study. The goal of this study is to improve and protect the lake for its designated beneficial uses. And these are uses that we at Water Quality, in accordance with the Clean Water Act, have established. The recreation, agriculture, and wildlife as fishery. Thank you very much. So this is our goal. From this study, to figure out how we can improve and protect these waters. Part of the purpose is to determine what a healthy lake looks like. It's been a long time. A lot of us haven't seen that healthy lake. And then ultimately develop a comprehensive water quality and improvement strategy that will essentially give us more levers to pull, more options to work with, to be able to continue to improve the lake without having to build the axe, take the axe approach to protecting the lake. So the science study, the Utah Lake Water Quality Study, has a fairly structured organization that we use to make sure that the science isn't done in a vacuum. And as other speakers spoke earlier, to have the scientists talking to the policy makers and vice versa, having them work together. So central to this is the science panel that is made up of experts in a variety of different fields, and I'll get to that. And they're guided by a steering committee. And the steering committee is also made up of experts in a number of different areas and from leadership around the county. So we want the science to be based on good, sound, fundamental principles, and we've brought in local and national experts so that we have the best information and the best minds working on answering the questions that are developed, mostly by the steering committee, who poses challenges to the science panel. What did the lake used to look like? What can it become? And so forth. And as I said before, the idea of having this level of expertise is to try to reduce the amount of uncertainty that we have in the answer to these questions so that policymakers can be informed and comfortable with making many, many decisions, difficult decisions, about the mechanisms that we'll use to protect and preserve the lake. So, the steering committee is an organization that's led by two co-leaders from the Division of Water Quality and from the Utah Lake Authority. We have representatives from academia, agriculture, water users, water rights, recreation, public health, wastewater treatment facilities, and so on. And their job is really to craft the decisions and the options that will be presented to the overall policymakers in making the decisions how we will go forward with, implementing strategies to correct the situation in the lake. Similarly, the science panel is made up of experts that we feel are needed to be able to, with the expertise needed to address the many, many challenges that are part of the problem of Utah Lake. As I mentioned before, there are a number. So fish experts, limnologists, aquatic ecologists, biogeochemistry, fisheries management, hydrodynamic modelers, water quality modeling, nutrient cycling experts, phycology, and these are really just a few of the expertise is needed. We identify these because they're sort of the obvious first step. But it's interesting as you go through the science that you've discovered that there's need for additional expertise that may not be so obvious from this list of experts, such as economists and other planners who bring other expertise that's necessary at just different phases of the project. So here's just sort of a smattering of the studies that have been commissioned by the science panel under the direction of the steering committee. And most of this work has been done, and Dr. Steed, the output from these studies is available. We actually have a library of these reports as well as quite a number of other reports that are sort of the literature background that helps support those studies. In the end, all of these science studies get boiled down and wrapped up into scientific characteristics that can be used to assess the health of the lake as a whole, mostly through modeling. This is a big part of the study that we're sort of just getting started on. The science has to provide the best information we can about certain aspects of the lake. How does nutrient cycling from the sediment interact with plant life, fish life? How do nutrients move through the system and move through the plant system? In the end, so in the end, when the models are complete and we're able to evaluate various different sort of scenarios for the lake, taking our knowledge of the lake and the chemical, physical, biological parameters that we understand and that we've collected a lot of data about and put into our models. In the end, the models will be used to develop scenarios for different outcomes for the lake. And ultimately, looking at these different these different inputs and the impacts that we expect to have from the lake allows us to envision strategies for managing nutrients, for example, and managing other aspects of water quality in the lake to accomplish an outcome. And then ultimately evaluating their practicality and looking at the costs and benefits. I mean, this is sort of an iterative process. We want to be able to provide leadership enough alternatives to be able to understand what's this going to cost and what do we get, and also to have this information available to the public so that the public is not caught off guard and not surprised or disappointed that the outcome for the lake and how we can benefit the lake by implementing various strategies is something that is understood as the communities begin to implement them. I'll go into schedule. One more slide. Community-based solutions. So as I said, the regulatory approach is a bit of a blunt instrument. And to be really successful in improving the lake takes more than just a bunch of permits that try to regulate specific users. There really needs to be a more practical approach implemented throughout communities based on the community resources and also their connection to the lake. What can various communities do within their range to be able to affect improvements, even in small ways, that together are integrated and result in a complete solution. Okay, so number of different steps, a lot of science up front, gathering data, conducting a variety of environmental studies, water quality studies, and doing focused research, answering some of the questions that are not textbook answers, but that really do require real research. Currently, really finishing up that core research work so that we can begin to implement the models and look at these scenarios that are ideas at this point for implementation of improvements and correction of the problems in the lake. So the other thing that I want to point out is, and I guess I said it before, is 2030 is a date on the map here, but really implementation for long-term solutions requires incremental steps. It requires involvement of all the communities, the public, in participating in making these changes that we need in our watershed and in our communities. And the long term is that there will need to be long-term maintenance that needs to be smart and efficient so that the corrections that we are able to implement will be long-lasting. I think we're going to take questions as a group. Thank you very much.
All right, Eric, you are next. Eric with the Utah Lake Authority will give the next presentation. It's all yours.
This guy, green is there. Okay. Thanks, Eric. All right. Well, I'm really selfishly glad that I got to go at the end because it meant that I got to see all the stages of this beautiful sunset behind us, and some of our presenters had to miss out on that. So thanks for putting me towards the end of the agenda, Ben. Today I just wanted to kind of give a brief update on the Utah Lake Authority, what it is, where we are in our stage of development. And I'm really glad that we got to hear these presentations that were before me, because it's refreshing to know that we have such a breadth of expertise that is already underway and collaborating so that we will be able to see great solutions and great outcomes as we start kind of continuing that collaboration and filling in the gaps. So real quick, the Utah Lake Authority has a board in place. We've held a few meetings. We've kind of established the framework of how we operate. We've adopted a budget that includes funding for our comprehensive planning. And we've got some funding in place, and we're in the midst of hiring legal to make sure that we do it all right. As the Lake Authority was created, it had stipulations so that we could continue as the Utah Lake Commission, so that we didn't have to drop the ball on any of the planning that's already underway. We've got a lot of cool projects and initiatives that the Lake Commission works on. Those continue as we go through these planning phases of the Lake Authority, and then we just kind of switch into that mode of operating the Utah Lake Authority sometime early in the spring. So by May 1st of 2023, the Lake Commission dissolves, and we begin operating as the Lake Authority. The Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands has been a phenomenal partner on this, and they are helping us as we go through this transition, kind of putting together what those management goals are and establishing how we operate as an authority, and kind of take some of those things off Forestry's plate so that we can dedicate more of a concerted effort just on this one water body. Utah Lake, I feel like we've covered a lot of these already, but we've got some issues that we're working on, and it's exciting to know that we've got entities like the Institute for Land, Water, and Air to kind of help us find the right solutions for addressing some of these issues. We've got algae blooms, we've got nutrient pollution, turbidity issues, problem fish species in the lake, and the list goes on. I use this photo to make two really good points. One is that when you get out on Utah Lake, the views are majestic. They're beautiful, phenomenal. And the other point that I make is that we have people that are diehard, and they're out on the lake surfing in this situation with water that looks like this. And we know that we can do more. We know that we can reduce these algae blooms with the right solutions, and we would like to start implementing those. The Utah Lake Commission has a lot of exciting projects and efforts underway. Those will be continued by the Utah Lake Authority. We're doing shoreline restoration work that has been hugely successful with a broad variety of partners with the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, with Utah County, and then DNR as a whole, and the Department of Agriculture and Food, who provide the grant dollars that allow us to do the shoreline restoration work that has seen such great results. 70% or more of the Phragmites along the shoreline has been eliminated, and we're seeing phenomenal results. We have some folks here in the crowd that took us on a tour recently out in the Powell Slough area, and we're talking about the phenomenal biodiversity that has come back as a result of that reduction of Phragmites, and it's really exciting to see that result from this great effort. We've got the Wacara Way Open Space Park that is funded and is in the engineering stages to create some trails through this amazing wetland. We've got marina enhancements that have also been funded and are underway. The South Saratoga Springs Marina is largely constructed. We've got a brand new marina on the north end of the lake that has gotten some funding and will begin construction here shortly. And then a number of upgrades to our other existing marinas through some great funding partners and grants that the state has made available, and Utah County has provided as well. We've got trails along the shoreline. For years, we've had these little segments of trails here and there along the lake shore, and we've got mayors and cities that have become very supportive of connecting all of these trail systems so that we have a contiguous trail that comes around the lake. Right now, we have essentially all of the gaps that exist between Utah Lake State Park and all the way up around to the north and then down to the south end of Saratoga Springs, at least funded. And it just takes some time for those to be engineered and permitted and constructed. We're working on wetland enhancements all around the lake, working on preserving areas that make the most sense to be preserved, and then restoring those that have been downgraded or had issues because of the invasion of Phragmites and Russian olives and other issues over the years that are really starting to look beautiful. We've got algae treatments underway in our marinas. Over time, as John talked about, we hope to find some solutions for the overall water quality and magnitude of those blooms. But in the meantime, we want to make sure that when people arrive at the lake that they can have a good experience. If at worst case scenario it means that they hang out in the marina and have a good experience there, that's a big win. Over time and occasionally, the main body of the lake is fantastic. There's just periods of time where we might have blooms, and through our monitoring efforts we can kind of educate folks where they can be and where they can enjoy the lake any time of the year. And then lots of access enhancements. One thing that we work on as the Lake Commission and will continue to work on is we have an Adopt a Shoreline program where we get folks out adopting the various access points around the lake and making sure that those look beautiful so that when people come to visit, they can have a good experience and not deal with the historic, buildup of trash and so forth that oftentimes plague these areas that don't see a lot of traffic and thus, become dumping ground for whatever reason. Right now, we have our request for proposal out for our management plan. I just wanted to kind of hit on a couple of the two tasks associated with that. The first is to kind of help us identify the vision and mission for the Lake Authority. We've gotten lots of good feedback from our board members, but we would like to kind of pack that into a well created statement for both our vision and mission. We would like to, as was brought up earlier, take an accounting of all of the management activities that are happening on the lake today and figure out a gap analysis, figure out what still needs to be done that can be most effective for improving the lake or fixing the lake, as was mentioned earlier. And so what this first task will be is to kind of develop a conceptual management plan, a shorter plan that kind of gives us our initial push on what we should focus on. And then the second task will be to flesh that out and really kind of fill in those gaps, not only the implementation, but also back that up with scientific best practices so that we're sure that what we're doing is the best route forward. We want to be able to prioritize those implementation techniques and then have the support of science to be sure that we're doing the right thing. A lot has been discussed this morning that we know that we can do a lot of stuff, but we want to make sure that we're prioritizing those things that will have the greatest impact. And so we've spoken with the Institute of Land, Water, and Air, and we hope that can be a collaboration from all of our universities. It happens to be out of USU, but they're pulling information from all of our researchers around the state here in the Valley, and can really help us be sure that we're getting this right. And with that, I'll end. And if there's any questions, we've asked Representative Brammer to be here as well as the sponsor of the Lake Authority bill, HB 232, that created the entity that we have now.
I think it would be good for Representative Brammer to share some thoughts, and then we'll move on to our next one. So, Representative Brammer.
Okay, I will be very brief. When you start out with legislation, most of us are fairly pompous windbags, and me included in that. But in that, sorry, Kevin, you're not. But it's a process of humility. And the reason why I say that is you start out with an idea, with something that you're trying to bring up. And a lot of us have ideas. And the reason why we have ideas Humans have ideas because we can kill our ideas instead of killing ourselves, okay? And you start out with an idea, and one of the scary things as a legislator is you have to let people know about your idea. And then they tell you how stupid your idea is. And you learn all the ways that it's dumb. And this process was a very good process to go through. There was a lot of input and a lot of people that said, you need to shave off a little bit here, you need to shave off a little bit there. But at its core, the idea was, let's try to coordinate, let's give the ability to receive more funding, and let's put more resources towards improving the lake. That's the core idea of this. Now, one of the other things was to provide more local input for the lake. And so in terms of funding, we were able to triple the amount of money that's currently there's a little less between $400,000 and $500,000 that goes to the Utah Lake Commission. It's paid for largely out of a few state agencies, but largely out of the local communities around here. But this is a state asset. And so we were able to remove that funding and replace it with triple the funding of $1.5 million ongoing from the state to triple the size of our shovel to make improvements with Utah Lake. That's one of the big successes of the Lake Authority. Now, in addition to that, there was a little bit of I felt there was a disconnect between what happens on the policy related to Utah Lake and what happens with what people that live near the lake want. And that's not always the same thing. Everybody wants a clean lake, but are the amenities up to par? Are we incentivizing the local communities to treat the lake as a feature and not a defect of our community? And the Lake Authority helps with that. It helps with that, and there will be some additional things that we do to help with that. It also allows the Lake Authority to receive grant money in a direct way. So we can go to the federal government and say, we want to do this water project. And the Lake Commission was not able to do that directly. They had to do it sponsored by another state entity or local entity. So there's quite a few benefits to having an authority over having a commission, but ultimately what it was all about was getting more resources towards the improvement of Utah Lake. Now, what the Lake Authority does not do in the legislation is it does not say how we're going to do it in every way. It is not a prescriptive bill. It sets up a structure. Now, I don't claim to be an environmental engineer, and you're seeing that there's so many different parts to the lake that I never claimed to know exactly what the prescriptive nature of fixing Utah Lake, and even, okay, maybe we don't even, maybe some people don't even want to fix perceived problems. They may not perceive them as problems. That's not what I set out to do. What I do understand is government. I understand the structures of government and the levers of government, and I set out to create something that would have a better chance of implementing the numerous solutions that are coming out from our state agencies and from others to improve Utah Lake, to evaluate and implement. So we'll be getting reports from this water quality study will be invaluable for the Lake Authority to evaluate. And they can choose what to implement. Most of government is not new policy, it is prioritization of policy. And the Lake Authority provides a body to really look at it with a pretty well-rounded group of people with local interests heavily included to evaluate that policy and prioritize it. Because at some point, we're going to have to make decisions on what we tackle first, on what we tackle second, on how much money we put towards it. And there will still be requirements to go to the legislature and seek additional funding because there won't be enough, or requirements to go to the federal government and seek grant funding because there won't be enough to implement everything that needs to be done or that is wanted to be done. But this will be a body that can coordinate those efforts and make policy decisions and policy prioritizations. And that is really the point of the Lake Authority. And they will make the decisions. It won't be something that I did by statute. So, thank you.
Okay, Tom, and I'm hoping I say your last name right, Sakovich. Okay, from Utah County is going to talk about what we're doing at Sandy Beach as far as recreation and the area that's being improved out there by the county and Forestry, Fire, and State Lands and the commission.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is an example of persistent patience. Thank you for being part of this because it's going to take years. I'll probably repeat myself because it's worth reminding myself for no other reason that Utah has not been Utah as we now know it for very long. It only became this over a period of time since the Olympics 20 years ago. So think about what happened. It took a few years before that momentum began, but in time, Utah began to go from being an ag-based state principally into a far more homogeneous environment than we've ever known before. And so as we move forward, these types of discussions are extremely helpful and critical. Mine is going to be you have seen a lot about the macro level, what is being done to improve the lake. I have some micro level to present. We had some ARPA funds provided to us. We've used it for a lot of infrastructure needs to the county itself, but also more recently for city level water, multi-generational water control and conservation. That included aquifer recharging, water storage, and other areas of water usage. And that has been a gratifying process. But this Sandy Beach part here, I'd like to show you, the next one is what I have to talk about now. It's a microcosm little speck, but it's a shoreline that some of you may be familiar with, just west of Springville City itself. A lot of off-roaders used to go there, driving onto the beaches, driving onto neighbor properties, and generally making a good time of it and making their presence known for some time after. And so with some work with Forestry, with the fire, with state, and with the county funding and coordination, we wound up going back about a year ago this month, I think, to go back and begin to make some improvements. So I wanted to share these with you. So what we've done is we included some restrooms, parking lots, picnic areas, guardrails, and removal of some invasive vegetation. And removing invasive vegetation is always an ongoing process. It never ends. I understand cattle love some of that, but the problem is the cattle leave their own signatures behind, so there's some limitations to what they can do. But the guardrail has helped tremendously keeping cars and vehicles of all sorts from driving onto the beaches and onto neighborhood properties and improving it. That area that you see did not look like that a year ago. And so we wanted to showcase a little bit what we're attempting to do to our little neck of the woods here. Another view. And then you can see a restroom. Very proud of that one. You can frame it and take it home. But obviously a very needful attribute there. The little roof there you see there is for a future picnic location. We don't have a picnic table there yet. That will probably be installed in the coming spring time frame. We've used the funds that was allocated to us for this improvement, and this is what we have now. Again, the guardrail is set up so that vehicles cannot or should not be able to drive through that area. Obviously, motorbikes can still get through some of that little space there, but it's meant for human trafficking. Oh, that's a wrong. Where have I been today? Human, let's see, what's another word? Visiting. There's some problems here. I need to visit with somebody, I think. So the phase is completed. We have 2 locations for the picnic locations set up. One of them you just saw. There are 8 more. They're in concept designs. We've used up the funds that we needed for this particular phase. We will be going back to the state, to the forestry, and to parks and the county, me speaking to myself, for additional funds for the 2024 period, and we'll do that beginning in the middle of next year. But the benefits, of course, is better access, cleaner access, and restricting motorized vehicles, access for emergency vehicles, be able to get through the gates, and safety for visitors and users throughout much of the year. Again, this is a microcosm, and the point of this is that we're doing our bit. Waikora Way is a remarkable improvement of that area for Provo and Vineyard Harbor, Lehigh Harbor. There's some other locations. So little by little by little by little, we're improving the shoreline, and that is crucial. The point here is that, again, let's move forward with the idea, where have we been? We have been an agricultural state. Water was not a problem, at least it was unknown as a problem until recently. We have in our hands a little device called a phone of various sorts, in which you can communicate anywhere on the globe and find out about any information that you want to see, true or false, instantly. And so we are dealing with a world in which Utah is not Utah 20 years ago. And we have to keep that in mind and be patient with ourselves. And when we have an opinion come this way or multiple ways at one time, we have to go through and apply ourselves. What are the facts? And the sciences will help with that tremendously. And individuals, citizens will be concerned, are we doing this the right way? Isn't there a better way of doing this? And yes, there may be a better way, and it may come from a corner that we had not expected. But that's where this process of persistent patience that we have just now heard tonight will pay off, because it allows that discussion, that dialogue to continue. And this kind of meeting will help us all tremendously in the coming months and years. It took a while to get to this point. It's going to take a while to reverse it. But I think we can. We just have to be methodical and respectful of ideas and where it's coming from. So that's my point, and I'm happy to answer questions after, but I'll be over here in the corner, and hopefully you won't catch me off guard again. Thanks so much, everybody.
Well, I think that was a lot of great information that we heard tonight, and thanks to everyone for their presentations and taking the time away from their families tonight to give us this event. And thanks to UVU for the snacks and refreshments that they provided and this beautiful facility, letting us use it to have this event. So we do have some time for questions. If people have questions, Ben can pass around the mic, and then the people that gave the presentations are still here. We're happy to have them answer those questions. So we've got a couple minutes. If we want to do questions, raise your hand and we'll try to get to who we can. Yeah, maybe, do we want to put some chairs up here? Let's put some chairs up here and put the presenters up at the front, and then we'll know who we're talking to. Yeah, there's no rules.
Can you pass the microphone around for the question?
You ready?
Great. I have a question for Teresa. I have lots of questions, but my first one's going to Teresa. Is she still here?
Sorry, yeah, I wasn't listening.
So learning about water rights was a fascinating process, especially for the fact that a lot of these were negotiated in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So Utah's water situation is changing, and probably permanently. Isn't it time to renegotiate those? Is that even a possibility? How do we renegotiate those and update those for our current conditions versus the way it was 150 years ago?
Sure. Yeah, that's on. And that's a very good point. There is a long history with water rights, the water rights system within the state of Utah. But I would say that the decisions that we make today are more sound and understandable because of that history that we have. Now, that doesn't mean that a water right can't be changed, and they can, and they are currently, and laws are updated as well. Some people say water right law is archaic and needs to be updated. Every year we have updates in the legislature to water law, and we'll continue to do that. So hopefully that answers your question.
Am I on? Yeah. I would like to start out with a statement, and then I have a question. I am blown away. I've been a citizen of Utah County from 1973, and this is the first moment in time I have encouragement that something's getting done. I am just blown away, and I want to thank Representative Stratton, because he's the motivating factor and spark that has brought people together rather than arguments and condemning and things saying my idea is better than your idea. I'm so sick of that. I almost didn't come because I thought that's what this meeting was going to be about. And for goodness sakes, am I glad I'm here. So that's my statement. I have a question. Of all the beautiful presentations here, I thought was fantastic. But I haven't heard, and I'd like to know when we're going to have a vision of what this valley is going to look like for our future children and children's and generations to follow. And I have found in my life, until you have a vision of what you want, you're just going to spin around. But now I see people really caring, putting an effort out to really search. But there needs to be a vision, a picture. What's this valley going to look like in 2 generations? What is going to be? Anyway, that's my question.
Maybe I could just take that, and there's several, yes, thank you. There's several things flowing into that. We saw the Utah Lake Authority is charged with creating a plan, management plan for Utah Lake. That's a piece of it, the completion of the study. And I challenged that study. It needs to be completed. We don't want to make a career out of studying. It needs to be completed. Draw the line in the sand and start acting. We saw that time frame 2024 begin, but ahead of that, we've got to have that brought to a conclusion. And so there's a lot of things taking place. That's what I would say. But there is something that I'd put out there as a legislative body. You look along the Wasatch Front, and we recognize that the growth, the primary areas of growth being Utah County. Utah County is projected to be almost not to be the same size or exceed Salt Lake County, but right now we're much smaller than that. And that's why this what do with the lake. But we've got to get that right, and we need to keep asking those questions. And we have great county leaders, commissions. One of the challenges is we have some of the dynamics are we have several cities that are not that we need to do better coordinating and cross-pollinating rather than being separate entities. It's part of that rugged individualism that's got us where we are. In that sense, we've got to recognize that the next step is a higher level of cooperation. So that's what I know there's others that could really it becomes the to set the policy and the stage. That's that setting the policy. Constitutional stewardship of the legislature. So, well,
so in terms of there is a lot of input that needs to be received before setting a vision. Now, there's a Greek philosopher named Heraclitus. Okay, Heraclitus said you can never step in the same river twice. Whatever we set as the vision will be iterative. It will need to be adjusted and moved. That's the nature of policy and dealing with complex issues like Utah Lake. But I do believe that you'll get a management plan that will be set out for the public for comment, probably within the next 18 months or so. I think that's about the timeline. I don't know what the RFP said, but I think it's somewhere along there. I don't want to put a date on it for them, but that would ultimately be the initial vision with regards to Utah Lake. But there's still a lot of coordinating and other things that needs to happen, and we want to get it right, and we want to get it as right as possible. And so, we're gonna take that first step into the river and see what it feels like, and then we'll have to take another step and see how the river has changed as we move forward.
Thank you so much. I just wanted hands of all the people that are residents of Utah County that came out tonight. I think that's beautiful. I hope you guys will keep inviting your friends and keep coming to these great things and give your input. Myself, I feel, though I've been a resident since I came to BYU in 1978 from California, I have studied so many things. But the one thing that I learned is to listen to the people who have lived here the longest. On Sunday, I was privileged to be invited by a farming family in Heber Valley, the oldest 94-year-old original resident farmer of Charleston, and his vision of, or his experience of what it used to look like before Deer Creek was even there. It wasn't as dry as when I was driving up. I mean, there's like no vegetation. It is so dry, it is so dead. And with my studies of permaculture design and research that I've done over years, and I've been invited by the Southwestern 5 states Agroforestry Action Network to speak because of my research and my experimental garden that cools temperatures, uses so little water now, and yet I have 150 fruit and nut trees and so many plants in there and everything. And because of that expertise, people are inviting me to their farms to do regenerative agriculture, to learn how to use less water. His original place that he grew up in the Depression as a little boy, and many of these people, like my dear friend Grant Holdaway that just passed, whose nephew started Wakara Way, the McCord family, the Cooks family, these people are generations of farmers and nursery owners, and what they've seen as progress and population growth here happen in Utah has broken their hearts. This man of 94 told me that we didn't even feel the Great Depression because we grew all our own food. We didn't use pesticides, high nitrogen fertilizers that we saw in an NRCS report last meeting here showed the most populated areas is where the algae bloom is the highest, because of high levels of nitrogen. Why we continue to use these products and throw them into that lake worse than trash, I do not understand. I know that academia is very important, but I think also if you academia people could include some of us that have done lots of research of other examples, speak to the local people, and have other solutions that maybe academia might not have, we sure would appreciate it. Is that possible?
Yes.
Yep. We'll be right there, just a sec.
Hello. Here's a question. What is the current status and likely future of the Lake Restoration Solutions proposal to dredge the lake and build a huge private island city complex on those dredgings in the lake? Is it constitutional, legal, and a detriment to Utah?
Well, I can take that question. I gave an update on that at the last the last interim session 2 sessions ago. So that update stands as it is now, and you should be hearing another update from the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands on that soon. So that's where it stands right now. So we gave an update at the interim session 2 interim sessions ago, back in October, or September, I believe. Was it September? Yeah, in September, we gave an update on that project.
But what's the update? I don't know.
Okay, so you're not familiar with that update? Okay, so I gave an update at that session saying that the project was not constitutional and it was not legally sound. So that was presented to the legislature at that time. So that's the update as of right now, and there'll be another update coming from Forestry, Fire, and State Lands soon.
Does the legislature have a response?
No, it was just an update. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for all the speakers and participants in tonight's program. I'm actually from Salt Lake County, but I'm heavily involved with Utah itself. My question tonight comes really down to, we talk about water, and I assume we all eat food, we all drink water, we all need water, right? So one of the big key aspects that I have focused on since moving here to Utah from Southern California has been farming. So in all of the discussions that I've been to so far, I have not seen very many farmers involved. Because guess what? They're always being blamed for a large percentage of water for agriculture. Okay, yes, we have come a long ways. And I've been coming here to Utah since I was 5 years old. Okay, I have all my relatives, cousins. It's like I'm an adopted son. Yes, we have had agriculture. We now have tech. We have a good mixture. But we need to also eat food. We need to have quality farming. We need to also teach better principles of quality farming, just like that young lady over there mentioned previously. And I've met with different legislators in the state of Utah. I've met with farmers and ranchers and co-ops throughout the state, trying to come up with plans and programs to help them. My main point is this: when we have programs like this, we need to do reach out programs to these co-ops, to these farmers and ranchers, and say, let us help you to come up with better ways to improve agriculture, water use, etc. My main component tonight is we all have to have food. We need to stop the blame of the farmers and ranchers. They're the ones that provide food for us. We can improve on these aspects, but let's be mindful that they're the ones providing the food on our tables.
Couple more questions and then we'll end.
I serve on the Utah Lake Authority as mayor of Linden City. And to answer that first question, 2018 and 2019 Envision Utah was an effort with the chamber and local leaders and stakeholders, was held various workshops and outreach, had an online survey that had several thousand responses. And you can go to a website called envisionutah.org, where there are 5 different scenarios of projected growth of all the cities and towns around the lake, and the different feedback that was received regarding impacts to water quality, air, and open space, and wages, and housing. And so that was a very, like a several-year process with a couple phases. Engaging the community, and so that's a great resource if you want to kind of see some of those scenarios where we're trying to see how the growth will impact quality of life here in the valley.
Thank you. Let's do one more question, and then we'll be here for a minute afterwards if people have other questions.
Thank you. I've had the opportunity of being in a role where I've seen many of these things started several years ago. The Lake Commission, Sandy Beach, the trail around the lake, and many of the things we've talked about. Let me suggest to you that we aren't at square zero on the planning effort. Every county in the state has a plan. Now, it's a plan, it's not the plan. But they all have one, and it's helping to direct them in the things that they need to do. But it's not totally filled out, if I can use that term. But they do have them. They've been created within the last decade, and the state has access to those.
Jamie, do you have time for one more? There was one we missed.
Yep.
Perfect.
I'm so delighted to hear your presentations. Thank you. And I noticed that several of you mentioned efforts that are already underway, treatment of the algae and shoreline restoration. How can we find, is there a place where this data is collected that shows what projects are already underway and what the outcomes of those projects are as they go along, so that we can all stay informed and learn about this more efficiently?
Our website is not perfect at this point in time, but utahlake.org has a projects tab on that page, and it has a list of all the projects, most of the projects that are underway on the lake, and we try to keep that updated. And so we'll, as we go forward, we'll make an extra effort to keep that as up to date as possible. But that's probably the best resource for that.
Same for Division of Water Quality. You can go to our website. Is this on? You can go to the Division of Water Quality's website and go to the Utah Lake pages, and you can see the Utah Lake Water Quality Study, and the results of all those studies are there.
All right, I think that does it for tonight. Again, thank you everyone for coming, and if you have further questions, we'll be around for a minute afterwards. Again, thanks.